Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. I've been playing Diablo 4 pretty much since it came out, like non-stop for the last 26 hours or so my apologies if I'm a little bit tired, but today I just wanted to make a video showing you guys what I've had success with in terms of grinding on my rogue from level 50 to 60, something that's like really easy to set up, but a very strong early end game build for you guys that you're going to have a lot of success with. It doesn't really require a whole bunch of legendaries or anything crazy. It's just incredibly strong by itself. And I figured that I would just make a really quick video showing you guys. Since this is more of like an early end game build, I'm not going to go into like super min-maxy stuff on, you know, best stats on every single individual piece of gear, absolute best in slot legendaries, best in slot legendary allocation. I'm not going to go into all of that because it's just the whole point of the build is supposed to be really strong without, like, you know, a whole bunch of bells and whistles. I'll go over some of the min-maxy stuff, but for the most part, this will be a pretty basic video. As you can see in the gameplay, the build absolutely shreds, and the whole point of this build is to just level up as fast as humanly possible so that you can get to World Tier 4 and just completely dominate everything. If you end up finding the video helpful, a like would be greatly appreciated, and feel free to check me out over on Twitch. I actually streamed my entire journey up to 60, so I'd love to see more of you guys around. Alright, so let's get into it. First off, I just want to talk about what skills I'm using and why, and then I'll go into my skill tree. So I'm using Puncture for the vulnerable here. Twisting Blades is obviously just too good to not use, and I mean, we all know at this point Twisting Blades is crazy good. Shadow Step and Dash are pretty much for movement, but Shadow Step also gives us some crit chance, and it also stuns, which is particularly good. But not having Dash, you just feel incredibly slow, which I wasn't really a fan of, and since we're trying to level up as fast as possible, zoom around the map and stuff, having Dash leveled up is very nice. And then we actually have Poison Trap as well as Shadow Imbuement. So a lot of you guys have probably seen alterations of this build where you either have Poison Trap with Dark Shroud, or you even have Poison Trap with Death Trap. The reason that I really like Poison Trap with Shadow Imbuement is that Poison Trap is good for a myriad of things. DC, survivability, vulnerable application, and just overall it's really good for like getting yourself out of sticky situations, or if you're fighting mobs that are higher level than you, it's really good for the crowd control. While Shadow Imbuement is just absolutely insane for very consistent AoE application of vulnerable and just doing a whole bunch of AoE damage, and it really just speeds up the gameplay an insane amount. I played with Death Trap a lot. I actually am a huge fan of Death Trap. The problem is that I just don't think it is as good as Shadow Imbuement until you probably get like way more cooldown reduction and stuff. I've tried all the versions of setting it up with Death Trap, whatever. I don't want to bore you guys too much, but basically I took off Dark Shroud, put on Poison Trap for all the CC and all this stuff, which we'll talk about in a second, and Shadow Imbuement for the massive AoE. If you're having survivability issues, you put on Dark Shroud instead of Dash, but then you lose a lot of your mobility. Poison Trap and Shadow Imbuement are good for a number of things. So let's get into the skill tree here. I'll go into the Paragon board later, but I imagine a lot of you guys don't have the Paragon board unlocked yet, or at least you don't have a lot of Paragon points yet, right? So Puncture, you just want to grab the Vulnerable, Twisting Blades, you know, max that out, and then you want to get 3 points into Sturdy and Siphoning Strikes for some much needed survivability. Then we're going to max out, well, we're going to upgrade Shadow Step to get the stun here, which is really nice, and also the crit chance against the enemy, 8%. Gonna get Weapon Mastery for some damage. I put a point into Enhanced Dash, but not really all that good. Then we put 3 points into Concussive. So anytime you knock down an enemy, you gain 15% increased critical strike chance. And with the Poison Trap, we're basically using this because it's going to knock down enemies, and that means that we can take advantage of damage versus crowd controlled. But we also get an extra 15% critical strike chance via Concussive, and we also get another 12% crit chance whenever we activate Poison Trap and we deal damage against a vulnerable enemy. Well, there's a legendary that enables us to get vulnerable with traps also. There's another reason to use Poison Trap, but the main reason is just that it applies crowd control and we get some extra damage. But having the ability to just knock down elites whenever you want, and this being an incredibly low cooldown, actually ends up in practice being very good. We're not using this for the damage, it's literally just for the crowd control. Then we have 3 points in Exploit and Malice for some damage, and then we went full into Shadow Imbuement here for the vulnerable. And consuming shadows is absolutely insane with Shadow Imbuement. You'll notice that the energy regeneration is significantly better. They actually nerfed Inner Sight recently, so having this is really nice. And then also, because we're using the Poison Trap, we get Alchemical Advantage for up to 15% increased attack speed, and we also get 15%, or enemies deal 15% less damage to us, which is just super awesome from a survivability standpoint. I went Precision Imbuement If you don't have all the renown skill points, just take the 3 points out of this, because this is really not that crazy. It's pretty good for just buffing the damage of your Shadow Imbuement though. 3 points into Innervation for a whole bunch of energy generation, and then 3 points into Trap Mastery like I mentioned before. And for our key passive, we're going with Momentum. This just gives us a lot of damage reduction, but also movement speed. Momentum is one of the main reasons that I think that playing this Shadow Imbuement build is better, because if you have to swap Shadow Imbuement to Death Trap, you then have to swap Momentum to Exposure to get more cooldown reduction for the trap, and then you also have to swap off of Inner Sight into Preparation to get even more cooldown. You don't actually have to do that, but in my opinion, it's like better to take advantage of the trap that way. Death Trap does a lot of damage, but I just think it is not nearly as consistent as just having the Shadow Imbuement, and having Inner Sight is still going to be really good for energy generation a lot of the time. If you don't have as many renown points as I do, just take the 3 points out of the Precision Imbuement and take the 1 point out of Enhanced Dash, and then the 1 point out of Trick Attacks. Obviously, I have a lot of legendaries because I've tried to min-max my character a pretty good bit, which has taken a very long time, but I mean, I was doing insane damage way prior to fully min-maxing and putting legendaries and everything. Up until like level 57 or something, I didn't have legendaries on every item because it was incredibly expensive to put everything on there, and I was just pretty much rocking with the Twisting Blades Orbit legendary. This is pretty much the only thing that you need for this build to actually function incredibly well, and you can get this up in Skosglen by doing Halal's Vigil. I believe it's right here. Yeah, there it is. You do that and you get the aspect, and you can guarantee just put it on, but also you want it to drop. You definitely want this to be on either a crossbow or on an amulet. Next best thing in terms of damage is going to be Edgemaster's aspect. Just deal extra damage based on how much resource you have. 17% multiplicative. Whenever you have Inner Sight up, it's just 17% extra damage all the time with Twisting Blades, which is the majority of your damage, so that's going to be very, very nice there. Loop of the Umbral is good for some energy generation. It's probably a little bit overkill when you have Shadow Crash and stuff, and I could easily see myself swapping it out. Getting the Expectant aspect is pretty good for just extra damage every time you basic skill, which we do every once in a while because we don't have like infinite energy. I kind of just went on a tangent. I'll show all the rest of them, but I just want to reiterate that like you don't need any legendaries for this build to work other than the Twisting Blades one. And the only other thing that would be really, really good would be Blast Trappers, because this gives you some single target vulnerable application, but you don't really entirely need it. Like, I don't know, it's a nice icing on top, but having Shadow Imbuement does help us with vulnerable, and we already have it with Puncture. This kind of just makes it more consistent, so we don't have to rely on Puncture as much, and you can get this guaranteed. So I would say just try to get it and put it on a piece. I mean, it's pretty inexpensive to do so, and it's just a nice quality of life thing to have. This one here gives us a lot of additional crit chance, just 9% crit chance pretty much up all the time, which I find pretty helpful. This one is 20% extra crit chance against an injured enemy, so it is what it is, but also we gain increased crowd control duration, which is going to work for our poison trap. I have a unique here, which is pretty cool. You don't really have to use this. I would recommend using like Shadow Step has 2 charges, or even this one here where dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy has a chance to daze them. This is really good for the CC. I'm just using this here because it's just extra damage. If I chill an enemy, I'm going to do 9% more damage to them, and it is multiplicative, so that's pretty good. Disobedience is very, very good for survivability. If I could, I would get a max roll of this and put it on my amulet for 75% damage reduction, like, or armor. This is crazy, crazy strong. I would highly recommend trying to unlock this early and slap it on either your pants or your chest, because the amount of armor that you get from this is super strong. And then I just have a barrier thing on for some extra survivability, as well as a basic skill grants damage reduction for even more survivability. I could talk about stats on each individual piece, but it doesn't really matter that much. The main thing that matters is just getting high weapon damage on your weapons and trying to get items that are sacred. So as you can see here, I have 2 sacred swords, and I was able to upgrade them. Upgrading them was actually pretty inexpensive. Enchanting them, however, is very expensive, especially putting aspects onto them, but upgrading them like 3 times is super inexpensive, and it increases their damage a lot. Stats that you're going to want to look out for: this sword actually has terrible stats. Generally, you want to look out for like crit damage is good, force skill damage, damage to close enemies, but the absolute best thing that you can get is vulnerable damage. My crossbow here is crazy because it has 28% vulnerable damage twice on it, and that is the single best stat in the game because it is on its own multiplier, and we're constantly applying vulnerable, so that's the highest damage output increase that you can really realistically get. Damage to enemies affected by traps is really good. Any amount of dexterity is also strong. 90 dexterity actually just means 9% extra damage, so don't sleep on dexterity. And again, damage to close, crit chance, and crit damage are things that you want to look out for. Make sure to put emeralds into your weapons for extra crit damage against vulnerable enemies. On your armor, you either want to go for topazes or rubies. And then on your jewelry, you'd probably just want to go for skulls. Just make sure that you're prioritizing getting a really high DPS weapon, and then try to make sure that it has the right stats, and then focus all of your materials on the weapon, because that is the single most important thing. I'm not sure if this will be relevant to most of you guys, but I guess if you're using this all the way up until level 70, I'm only level 60 right now, but I plan to do the World Tier 4 thing pretty soon here, and I wanted to get this video out. But for your first Paragon board, you want to put in closer to increase the damage of your Cutthroat skills, but we don't have a lot of points put in here because we want to immediately beeline get Exploit in our second Paragon board, and this basically gives us instantaneous vulnerable application permanently and 30% increased multiplicative vulnerable damage. How much vulnerable damage you get from this depends on how many strength points you have, how many times you've upgraded it, but you want to put it in the no witness board because the no witness board has a good amount of strength here, and you don't have to put that many points into this. Like, I'm only level 60 and I don't have any renown Paragon, and I was able to unlock this, and this is just ridiculously good. You just get instantaneous vulnerable for free in AoE. It just makes clearing that much faster, and once you put this in, you could probably start going back down here to get some dexterity nodes to buff up Cutthroat. To be honest with you, I haven't looked into what I want to do with my next board, but it's probably like a lot of points away, so by the time you're like, I don't know, level 65, maybe you're thinking about that. I guess Ambush is pretty good, Combat is good, I don't know, I have to look into it more, but definitely, at the very least, make sure that you get Exploit. You end up getting a lot of these different glyphs simply just by playing the game. If you're level like 54, don't worry about not having the glyphs. If you're just doing some of the Tree of Whisper stuff, or you're just doing nightmare dungeons here and there, you'll end up getting more than enough glyphs. Anyways, that's pretty much it for the build. I just wanted it to be a very simple, just like, hey, here's, you know, what you guys want to be trying to use. It's basically just Twisting Blades. Poison Trap gives you a lot of the survivability. Twisting Blades damage is insane, and Shadow Imbuement really just speeds up your gameplay with the energy generation, the AoE clear, and it's just really, really strong by itself. You don't have to worry about getting like 6,000 legendaries for it to be good. Obviously, all the legendaries that I have make it way, way better, but I got all the way up to 60 in, you know, 26 hours or whatever without any problems at all, using pretty much the exact same build. Alright, that's pretty much it for the build. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe for more videos similar to this one.